Hey guys, this is Omer from MMOs.com, and we'll be doing a financial look at NCSoft, the Korean gaming giant. I hope the video in the background got your attention because now we're going to get down to business. As we did with the Nexon video, the first thing we're going to take a look at is exactly how big is NCSoft. And of course, because NCSoft is publicly traded, that number is actually quite easy to obtain, as the company is publicly traded, and we have a Bloomberg page up for the company. And what we're looking for here is something called a market cap, which I circled for you guys, and that really just means what the value of the company is. And in order to get that number, you basically multiply the stock price that you can see underlined in red by the total number of shares outstanding. So in this case, very simple math shows that if you multiply 21.929 million, which is the shares outstanding, by the stock price of 252,000, you get the number of 5.526 trillion Korean wons. Keep in mind, the stock price changes every single day, so this is the current value of the company as of this video. So if we take those numbers and put into Google, we turn 5.5 trillion Korean wons into US dollars, we get a number of 4.8 billion. And we want to compare that to other companies of similar size. We have companies like Nexon, which we talked about last time, which is worth 6.45 billion. And then we have a company like Perfect World, which was recently acquired for $1 billion. And on the bottom right, I included some other big gaming companies to give you some additional context for the size of these companies. The companies I'm generally highlighting here are some of the biggest gaming companies, so NCSoft is actually quite large, one of the biggest gaming companies in the world. Next up, we can look at NCSoft's investor presentation and their earnings release. This is the part where they basically explain how much revenue they make, how much profit they make, and which of their games are typically doing the best. This first slide gives you an overview of how they're doing financially. If you look at their sales, it's been ticking up slowly. The units are in millions of Korean wons. However, for the latest information, I did convert it to US dollars. So their sales in the last quarter were $212 million, and their net income on that $212 million in sales was $58 million US dollars. Now, net income is basically profit after all expenses, including taxes and everything else. So net income is probably the most important figure here. However, sales or top line sales is important too, because it shows you the company's growth. And now all these numbers are increasing, which is a good sign for the company, which should be pretty obvious. You know, numbers going up is good for them, as long as it's revenue and profits. You don't want losses going up, that's bad. This next slide shows the breakdown of their sales by their IP, which is their intellectual property, basically how their games are doing. Now, what really shines over here is how strong the Lineage franchise has been. In fact, I mean, the number basically trumps everything else. I mean, Lineage 1 alone makes more money than Lineage 2, Aeon, Guild Wars 2, and WildStar combined. Another exceptional performer here is obviously Blade & Soul, but keep in mind, this list is for 1Q 2016, and that's a quarter the game launched in North America and Europe, so it had a sizable boost from its initial launch. I expect that number will decrease when they report earnings next quarter. But in terms of profitability, it's worth mentioning that Lineage 1 is actually one of the most profitable MMORPGs in the world, as it made about $339 million last year, making it the 6th highest grossing online PC game. Also worth mentioning is that because the game is so old, the costs of operating the game are lower. NCSoft is making a lot more money on every dollar of revenue on Lineage 1 than they are on games like Blade & Soul and Aeon, because these are newer games and it requires more upkeep and maintenance. And although profitability by game is not disclosed, I would wager that Lineage 1 makes more profit than the rest of the games combined on this list. But of course, these are just revenue numbers, so we don't know profit by game. Now, the sad game on this list is unfortunately WildStar. It only made $1.1 million last quarter, which is definitely a disappointment for NCSoft. In fact, a company called Daewoo Securities, which is the largest investment bank in South Korea, predicted that WildStar would net $0 in revenue by 2017 for NCSoft. So Daewoo Securities, an investment bank, is predicting that WildStar will completely shut down by next year. This is obviously a forecast. They don't know for sure, but it's their guess. The next slide breaks down sales by regions, and you can see in 1Q 2016, they got most of their money in South Korea, followed by US and EU. So the US and Europe plays a much bigger role for NCSoft's revenue base than it did for Nexon. Japan is relatively tiny, and that last one for royalties should be for China. Move right along, we'll take a look at the company's balance sheet, which shows you basically what assets they own. Now, to get a very quick glance to see how they're doing, you can always look at their cash balance, their debt, but a very important thing to look at right away is something called stockholders' equity. Now, this number over here is 1.6 million. However, the units are in millions of Korean won, so it's 1.6 million Korean wons. And this number is basically calculated very simply by taking all of the company's assets and subtracting it by their total liabilities, which is all the money they owe. All their assets minus all their liabilities, so what you have left over is called your equity. So in this case, the number you have is actually 1.4 billion US dollars equivalent of equity after subtracting the value of all the debt from all the assets. So you have a net number. Generally speaking, so long as this number is positive, it means the company is doing okay. I'm moving back to the question of exactly how big is NCSoft. It's worth mentioning that NCSoft actually owns several other companies and has invested in other gaming companies too. You can see in this next image what companies NCSoft has invested in and controls. You can actually see that they actually own Entrive, which I actually didn't know until I made this video. Entrive is the South Korean company that made Trickster Online as well as Pangya, two games that aren't really doing too well. But NCSoft paid about $100 million for this company in 2012. They bought it from SK Telecom. And the companies on the right of the consolidated company are basically companies that NCSoft has invested in. When they control over 50% of a company, it would be consolidated, so it would be on the left side of that chart. But because they don't own 50% or greater, it's on the right side as an equity investment. And a bunch of these are basically smaller companies that are developing mobile games and various other titles. And the reason NCSoft invests in these companies is so they can get first rights and first dibs on publishing the games. And if the game does really well, they'll probably buy out the entire company. And a quick recap, NCSoft is worth $4.8 billion US as of this video. They make about $212 million a quarter in sales, $58 million per quarter in profit, and $1.4 billion in equity. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I hope it was informative, and I shall leave you with this wonderful video in Blade & Soul. Anyway guys, later.